Hello everybody, it's Michael Hollands once again for Sound of the Movies. Today I have the pleasure to be joined by Rupert Gregson-Williams. Rupert's career in Hollywood began in the late 90s. From that point on, he showed his skills on many pictures, either as a conductor, music producer, musician, or composer. His credits include Hotel Rwanda, Over the Hedge, Winter's Tale, The Crown, Hacksaw Ridge, Wonder Woman, and many more. Most recently, Rupert scored Aquaman, directed by James Wan, a massive superhero film which grossed almost $1 billion worldwide. Welcome, Rupert.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining me. It's a pleasure. Rupert, your career began in 1998, if I'm not mistaken, when you had worked on projects such as Ants and also The Prince of Egypt. And from that point on, your assignments had gotten bigger and you started working on more acclaimed films like Hotel Rwanda. Could you tell me a bit about your early days in the business and how your career developed and grew from there?
Well, my career was much like, everybody else's in the sense that, you start trying to get work, whether it's writing for a corporate video just to practice writing for picture, or doing commercials or pitching for commercials, and then trying hard to get into some TV. And I had a little bit of luck along the way, which some people make for themselves, and some people are lucky enough to have it where they meet someone at a party, or they just happen to have some serendipity, and I've benefited from all of those things. But right at the very beginning, I was a chorister at Cambridge as a young boy, and so music is in my blood, and my family are musical, as I'm sure you're aware.
Yes.
And so music was always on the cards for me, and composition became important to me, or rather improvisation became important to me when I was in my mid-teens, and it was only in my late teens that I realized that I could play with those improvisations by using a sequencer or using a computer, or in those days some sort of funny little box that I connected to a keyboard, and I could play with the improvisations and store them, and that was the first real entry for me. And then my entrance into movies really came later in my 20s, where I joined the dots together. I'd always been a fan of Ennio Morricone and obviously of John Williams back in the day when I was at school, watching all the great scores that he produced, and but I never really understood that I could make a living from that. I really thought that was unattainable for me until in my early 20s I met some TV composers. And, I improvise, I love film, I love TV. Well, that's where it sort of came together. My first job really was with a composer called Richard Harvey in the UK, a highly talented individual who gave me a break. And, I tidied up his DATs and his tape machines in his studio, and that's made him coffee. And then one day he said, "Hey, do you fancy programming some drums on this, or do I've got the melody. Do you want to do some orchestration?" And it sort of develops like that. And I think and I hope that that's the way it works for a lot of young composers, is they enter into some sort of menial tasks with a composer who's working, but then the trust grows, and then they are allowed some freedom, and that's when your chance is. Don't screw it up when you get that chance.
Yeah. I mean, many young composers have stated that the very best training you could possibly get is working for an A-list composer, as an arranger or as an additional composer. I mean, you had also been involved with remote control productions back then, Media Ventures, and also, like I mentioned in my intro, when you worked on The Prince of Egypt. Would you agree on that statement? Did you have the same experience?
I definitely benefited from that, and I could reel off a whole bunch of names of serious composers, working composers at the top of their game now, who benefited from that. Of course, it all depends on the composer you work for. I mean, you may not, I did do a little bit of work for an unnamed composer who the only thing he ever taught me was how not to treat people. So I you hope that you land with somebody who is a decent human being, and B, is willing to give you the chance to experiment. Because of course, when everybody is different. I entered into it knowing and trusting my musical capability, but knowing that I had no understanding of really filmmaking and of film scoring, and understanding the whole what a director is trying to achieve with his movie, just because I'd never experienced it. So I was very, very lucky to work with Richard and then Hans, who were very generous in their time and allowed me into the meetings to see how these great composers and these great storytellers engaged with the directors. Before then, it was all about the music for me. It was, I loved movies and have always loved movies, but before I really started working for a serious composer, I thought it was all about the music and what I could do with it. And working for these people made me realize it is not all about the music. It's all about collaboration and storytelling. And I am will be hopefully lucky enough to be a major part of how that story is told, and I can affect it greatly. So it's about the generosity of the person you work for. But in a long answer to your question, I would say, if you can get work as additional composer, or even just making the coffee for an A-lister, then you are very lucky, and I know I was, and lots have been. But I would say that when I worked for Richard, I literally made his coffee, and I occasionally did some edits for him. I didn't just get straight into orchestrating and doing additional composing. And I think some people that I've met over the years, because of course now I'm in the position where I tend to get a dozen or so or more people contacting me every week asking if there's any work, and some of them without any experience kind of, I think, feel that they might be able to jump straight into the deep end straight away, and that's a very, very difficult thing to do. You should be patient, and you should allow yourself to be on the lowest rung for a moment.
It takes time to grow and to develop. It's absolutely. And
the other thing I would say, and if there are young composers out there listening, is to find your own voice is terribly, terribly important. And if you were to apprentice with someone with such a strong voice as someone like Hans Zimmer, or say Tom Newman, or Danny Elfman, I'm just naming people with their own very strong voice.
Yes,
it's exceptionally valuable experience, but it also can be quite tricky for you because you get heavily influenced by them. And for the rest of your career, you don't want to sound like a second-rate Tom Newman or Hans Zimmer. You want to try and find your own voice. And if you're if you're more of a romantic or if you're more of a technician, or if you're more of a beatsmith, then do keep that side of you and work at it. Do not try to write large ostinatos or try to do all the things that the big man does, because find your own voice, and that's terribly important in this day and age, and for your soul,
Absolutely. I mean, there are many factors involved, it's one thing, being a good composer, but it's another thing being a good, people person. I think there are so many, let's say, attributes which you need to adhere to, and also which you should have in order to make it in this business. If you can't deal with producers or directors, or if you're not willing to follow some advice or accept some advice, I think it can be pretty tricky.
Yeah, you have to be a very good listener, and you have to be able to understand story. You need to be a good lover. You need to be a good receiver of hate. You need to have to be all those things. But you also, there's some mystery with composition. I mean, you think of a great director. He can probably do half of the things on the set. I mean, he can produce, he can write, he can direct, he can light, he can act, he can do all these things. But one thing that he probably cannot do at all is write a note of music.
Yeah.
He can sing a little, probably, and so for him it's quite scary sometimes. And it's also, you know, slight smoke and mirrors. He's walking into a magician's lair, and you know your job is to make him comfortable and demystify it, bring your own voice, of course, but not to scare the living daylights out of him, and to adjust what vision he had from the beginning. You know, you want to. It's a collaboration, but it can be quite scary for a composer, for a director or other, walking into a composer's lair, because it's all, he's suddenly speaking a foreign language. You know,
Yeah, it's a different turf.
Yeah.
Speaking of great directors and also great actors, Mel Gibson,
Yes.
being a prime example. You had worked with him on Hacksaw Ridge, and as I understand, you came on board very late. And could you perhaps give me some insight into your approach writing a new score which was so close to the film's release?
Yes, interesting. I mean, I love Mel's films, and my experience with him was genuinely one of the most fantastic experiences of my life, and I hope I shall repeat it again. He's such a wonderful filmmaker. In this instance, yeah, I got the call. Funnily enough, I'd been really busy that year, and I'd promised my wife that I was going to do nothing. We were going to go to the south of France, and we were just going to sit there and do nothing. I was going to enjoy life. Got there within a day, Mel phoned and said, "Can you be in Sydney tomorrow morning?" And I was in South of France. So that was the end of that. Luckily, I was forgiven by my wife. But the reason why it was so quick and sudden was because, as you say, things had gone slightly awry with the scoring beforehand, which happens. You know, these discommunications happen with composers. So I was brought on, and it was, by the way, we've got to be done in less than 3 weeks' time, because we need to be to get into Venice, into the Venice Film Festival. We need to be finished by this date, and that is in 3 weeks' time. So you haven't got long. So get over here, please. So that's why that was all sort of a bit sudden and urgent. And entering into it was interesting. A brief story. I went down to Sydney. I watched the movie with Mel. He had very kindly set up a keyboard and a computer. I brought my laptop with me to do some writing. I watched the film. We had a long chat about character, and Mel is all about story and character, and he's very passionate. So we had a long, 3 or 4 hour chat about the film after watching it. And then I went into this dark room with my laptop to try and write a theme. And of course, with jet lag and shock and awe, I had no idea what was going on. Mel came in very sweetly, sat down on the ground next to me and said, "Pretend I'm not here." And I sort of said, "Actually, I can't pretend you're not there. Put me on a plane. I'm going back to London, going back to my studio, to my thing. I'm going to have you your main theme within 24 hours. I got an idea, and it's going to come to me on the plane." Probably lying through my teeth, but I kind of had a gut feeling that was going to happen for me. So I did that, got on the plane. Somewhere between Sydney and Dubai, I had a revelation about what the main theme was going to be, got into my studio after 24 hours and wrote something, sent it to Mel, and luckily that first idea was the main theme, and it was and he loved it, and we worked with that. Things could have gone shockingly the other direction with such little time, but lucky. Sometimes you just need that pressure, you know.
Yes.
Aquaman, I had a year, and I didn't really get the main theme for the first 5 months, you know. If I'd had 3 weeks, I might have got it the first day, you know. There's something about that wonderful creative pressure of, you know, you talk to the director who has a real vision, you know you have to come up with it, and you know, luckily my brain didn't let me down, and we came up with something. But I could go into it further about working with Mel, but that was the opening and the beginning of it.
Great. So did you still have many discussions with Mel due to time constraints, or were you given, or did you have free reign, so to speak?
No, I didn't have free reign, but I mean, obviously, with great luck, I wrote that theme and realised it. Got back to my studio, realised it very quickly. I got on the phone to him, and I'd only left, 20 hours before, and said, "I've got something to play you." Played it to him, and he loved it, luckily. So then we had a great jumping off point. But no, I spoke to him every day, once in the morning for about an hour. And it wasn't just about the music that I was writing. It was still about me trying to understand, drill down into the character. Because after all, that is what all this collaboration is about. Is in this instance, in Hacksaw Ridge, Mel had a very, very clear idea about how the main character felt spiritually, and what the reason why he went to war, and the certain love he had for his wife, and all those things, and we just had conversations about that, rather than that piece of music he wrote in Reel 2. We didn't really do that for the first week. It was more, I had this thought about that moment where he has his epiphany. It's not like this, it's more like this. Lots of those conversations, which really helps a composer,
Yes.
Formulate the emotion.
It's a very well crafted film, and I liked it a lot. I mean, Mel Gibson's directorial efforts always convinced me, and it was a further example of his skills, and also, of course, of your skills. I mean, very good score, and the standout cue for me was Praying.
Yeah.
When they take the ridge at the end. That was the very best cue for me personally.
Good. I'm glad you enjoyed it. It was some of these things come very quickly. There's a moment where he's up on the ridge, and he is actually, he's not praying, but he's saying, well, should I go back and get all these people, or should I just escape like everybody else? And that little moment, I kept on chipping it away at it over the 3 weeks. I'd spend an hour a day, 2 hours a day on it, and we didn't get it right until about 2 days before we recorded it. There's a very fine line, whether it was just brave, whether it was, someone running out of. It was just the balance of bravery and spirituality was a difficult one for me to get, and I wasn't quite getting it. And I did, but Praying came very easily. Because it's just such great filmmaking. Sometimes things lift you off your chair and make you excited. If you come into the studio in the morning excited, there's this feeling you get in the pits of your stomach, which is I guess it's butterflies, and it feels like you're just about to go on stage and sing in front of 50,000 people. Well, actually you're just sitting in a dark room on your own, and that is a very exciting experience, which ties in with this whole thing of only having 3 weeks to do it. It's that's kind of the reason why you do it. Not to be put under so much pressure, but that feeling in the pit of your stomach is. There are two types of pit of the stomach feeling. One is that excitement where you really feel you're onto something, and the director is telling you things that are really feeding you. And then the other pit of the stomach is when you're not quite getting it, and it scares the hell out of you, and you don't know how you're going to do it. This film was the good type,
Rupert, as I understand, you have 2 studios, one in Los Angeles and one in the UK.
Correct.
How do you divide your time? Are you in Los Angeles when you're working on a project, or how does that work?
No, I work from the UK. My home is in the UK. My family's in the UK. I always write everything where, obviously if I'm in the US and I have a meeting, and the meeting doesn't go as well as I wanted it to, or there's some little tweak or development that needs to happen, rather than jumping back home, doing it and then going back, I'll stay for a couple of days and work on it, then have another meeting with the director or producer or artist, whoever I'm working with, and then once they're happy and I'm happy, that I'll shoot back home again, whether that's for another 2 weeks or 4 weeks, and carry on. So I'm most comfortable in my studio at home in the UK, and that's where I do my work. But I can work anywhere, and it's good to have somewhere where we can all meet and chat, and if I need to do a tweak here and there. But back in the day, when I'm happy to be in Los Angeles for months on end. Obviously, if the filmmakers require me to, and sometimes they do. on Hacksaw Ridge, Mel was in Sydney and I was in the UK, so it didn't make any difference, you know. But as my career has gone along, I feel that there's a little bit more trust with the people I work with. I've done 20 films or something with Adam Sandler. You know, he doesn't require me to hold his hand through the process anymore. You know, I speak to him on the phone and I send him music, and then we meet in the room sometimes, and the score works for him. You know, because we trust each other.
Great. Rupert, one of your major projects of 2017 was DC's Wonder Woman.
Mm-hmm.
What is essential when working on these films in terms of sound? What is the definition of superhero sound to you personally?
Well, that's a good question. There's a tried and tested superhero sound, which one tries to not be too cliched. And sometimes it's difficult not to be cliched. There are certain moves that you can do that are, and there are wonderful composers out there who try so hard every time they write something new to avoid cliches, and they're the ones that I admire and I love. I try not to, and I probably fall into a trap every now and again, and I try. I don't. With one with Wonder Woman. There was already a theme there, which was actually a very original sounding thing that Hans had written. And I didn't sort of go, what am I going to do that's new? What can I do that is new, that hasn't been done before? I didn't have that pain, actually. I just thought, what is this film? Well, it's emotional, and it's a journey for a young girl becoming a hero. And I just wrote, I didn't think about it. I just wrote my guts, and luckily it worked out. And I think the reason why it worked is because I was writing always from an emotional point of view. I wasn't writing from I wasn't writing from a heroic point of view. I was always writing from emotion. Even in the battle scenes, I was more with how are these characters going to end in this battle or this fight. And so I was always thinking emotion, and I think that in a way helped the film, because you felt emotionally involved and invested, rather than just being bashed over the head once again. So for Wonder Woman, I feel that maybe the emotion was the strength. Aquaman, I felt that going all synth-tastic under the water was my way of changing it up a little.
Speaking of Aquaman, another big DC project which you scored. The score was released in December 2018, and the film has been a tremendous success so far. As I mentioned in my introduction, it grossed almost $1 billion so far, which is absolutely huge.
Yeah.
And for this film, you also used some tremendous synth sounds, which sounded both modern and also vintage. Did you kind of revisit some, let's say, 70s or 80s songs or scores to find the right synth sounds? The first piece, Arthur, the rhythm, one of the rhythms, kind of reminded me of the song "I Feel Love." Was that a factor? Was that yeah, really? Was that an inspiration?
No, it wasn't, but that's funny you should say that. No, well, the good thing with, moving just specifically onto Aquaman, James Wan, such a lovely man, has his vision of the film, always wanted me to include synths and those sort of late 70s, 80s synths, and, just also where he directed it is so supremely comic book. I mean, more so than any other DC. I can't speak for other superheroes, but in the DCEU, this is so fantastical and comic book, and just the way he makes it look, that I felt I didn't have to hold back. I didn't sort of set myself. I set myself a goal that I would just have fun, and if I could get James on my couch in my studio, jumping off it every now and again with excitement, then that was the goal. And I achieved that just by having a lot of fun. I mean, I did, I borrowed a couple of synths from various people, from Harry, from Hans. I've got a shed load myself, a literal shed up in a field, which I got out, dusted off, and brought into the studio and had a lot of fun. And I hopefully, you hear in the score that some fun was had, because we did have a lot of fun making it. But there wasn't any sort of conscious. I didn't sort of reference, and I didn't go and listen to any particular Jean-Michel Jarre or any particular Vangelis or any of these songs that people have quoted. Some of the rhythm is. I just tapped into it in my inner disco.
What was the first musical idea which you came up with for Aquaman?
Atlantis.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, the first idea I came up with was a theme for Arthur for Aquaman, which didn't make the film, wasn't the right thing. It was a distorted bass. It was really cool, actually, but it was just not quite right. And the reason why it wasn't right, firstly, it wasn't melodic enough for us to. We really did need a melody to sort of to use later on. It can't just be a sort of a thrashy, distorted bass. And also, he, as you know, or when you see the film, Arthur doesn't really do anything. He gets beaten up just as much as he wins battles for some of the film. He's not the heroic king yet for quite a while. So it felt cheap to use just a distorted rock and roll bass. So the first thing that I actually wrote that hit the mark for James was this Atlantis theme, which is very, very synthy and very broad. Has sort of feels that sort of big Vangelis-y, Jean-Michel Jarre land of broad synths and what have you. And that I wrote for the entrance to Atlantis. That was the first cue that I wrote, and it's stayed attached to the film from the day I wrote it back last January through to the release, and it's still there.
In your discussions with James Wan, did you spend time talking about characters mostly, or did you focus on the images of the plot as a whole?
Characters. I mean, James really filled me in on exactly what he felt the journeys for all the characters were, and wanted also to know when I had watched it for the first time, what did I think, which journey did I follow the most, and then once we got down to writing, because I wrote quite a lot of themes before I even wrote any score. I wrote for, specifically specific character themes, and so I wrote an Aurum theme, for instance, and he got him in here in my studio, and we played it, and he loved that straight away, as he did with Black Manta. With Arthur, we discussed it a lot, and I tweaked it a lot, and towards the end, he was standing by me, and he was sort of humming along and sort of saying, "Yeah, I love it, but could it not have a little answer here somewhere?" And I go, "What do you mean, like this?" And so we did a lot of collaboration in on the Arthur theme, but it was always down to character and story. He never sort of said, "Look, could you do it on a mono synth and then answer it with a cello?" We didn't talk that. We didn't talk that sort of language.
I mean, the characters in this film are, of course, superheroes and hence, larger-than-life characters. And there are many characters in this film, Arthur and Black Manta. How did you figure out which theme or which sounds might be most appropriate for a certain character?
Well, you mentioned Black Manta. I mean, I when I first saw the film, he looked a little strange because his suit is visual effects mostly. So when I got on board, he didn't look quite the Black Manta that you see now in the finished movie. So James sent me a whole load of artwork, which is really cool, of the way Black Manta looked, and I knew he made a suit, and so that was easy for me, because I just felt, well, make it industrial. We know there's a big bit of revenge rage involved, and so writing that theme kind of it wrote itself really, because it was obvious what it needed to be. As was Aurum, the brother. Yeah, I had to work. I worked with on Mira's theme. It was incorporating Skylar Grey's melody from her song from the Untitled, and I found that really helped soften Mira quite a lot, because Mira and Arthur argue quite a lot in the film. There's a lot of banter, some funny banter, and then they sort of bicker a bit. And I found that the theme softened it a little bit. It helped soften and made you realise actually together these two could really be something. There could be some genuine, plausible love between them. Who else? I mean, Atlantis had its own theme, really, and Arthur's, of course. There were two parts to Arthur's theme: the heroic and melodic, emotional part of it, and then occasionally I'd bring out the distorted bass and guitar and play a riff that I felt was very Jason, which is the character Jason brings to Aquaman.
Water Tower Records released your score, featuring about 60 minutes of your material. Will there be a deluxe edition? Because the film obviously features much more score, and it is almost 2.5 hours as a total running time. Are there any plans on releasing a 2 CD set, perhaps?
Well, I don't know if there's any plans yet, because since the release and then the popularity of it, it's all been sort of holiday, Christmas time. So, no one's really been communicating about it. I would like to. I'm definitely, if there isn't a deluxe edition, I'll definitely be making some more tracks available for the fans who have been asking, and there have been a lot asking. There are moments where some specifics. I mean, there are specific moments people are saying, well, we really love that, but you haven't even got it on the album. Things like when Mira uses her superpower. I didn't include that on the album, or it wasn't included on the album, and I'll try and make that available. And there are one or two other things that people are asking for. So, yeah. But I can't promise a deluxe actual release. This probably will be a digital release. I don't know. I have to speak to Warner Brothers and Water Tower.
You produced the album as well. Were you given instructions to keep it just under 60 minutes, or how did that work?
Well, we had a lot of needle drops that were going on. So by the time the decisions, they were slightly out of my control, actually, to be honest with you. And I've got to tell you now that there's a few people. I've had some people asking me, why did you mix up the order of the album? It's not actually in the order of the film.
Yeah.
And that was my fault. And I'll take the blame for that. I just kind of wanted to I wanted to play I wanted people to hear the Arthur theme. I wanted people to hear 2 or 3 of the more important themes played out that in versions that weren't actually in the movie in that in that arrangement before we then went off, and then after that we mostly went in order. So if anyone gets upset about that, then they can just blame me.
But it's so common not to release the score in a chronological order. I mean, or the mix on the album is different. To the film mix, so it's such a common thing, and many people actually complain about scores not being released in their chronological order, but it has been done, since forever. I mean,
yeah, I'm not the only one. Good, I'll take that.
I mean, when a score is given deluxe treatment, when a label like Intrada or La La Land releases a new or expanded release, they are usually arranged chronologically. But a regular film score, by let's say if Water Tower releases it or Sony Music, they are on many occasions, not chronological, or the cues are mixed together, differently, and it's so common, But I get the point where some fans are upset about this, but that's just how it happens.
Yeah, exactly.
But Rupert, when a film such as Aquaman has a big budget and does this mean they usually provide you with a big budget for orchestra and all the equipment as well, or does this, vary from project to project?
I'm sure it varies from project to project, but I mean Warner Brothers, who I've worked with closely. I've done a big film for them every year the last few years. Wonder Woman, Aquaman, and Legend of Tarzan. I guess 3 films in 4 years, and they've just been fantastically supportive to me. I mean, I could not be more supported by the music department there. They just want. If I say I really would like to achieve this, they will do everything they can to help me achieve it. I haven't said to them yet. I really, really would like to have 1,000 cellists playing on the summit of K2. It's going to sound great, but if I did ask that, they would move heaven and earth to try and make it happen. They've been great to me, and I feel part of the family over there at Warner Brothers and DC, and that's a special place to be. They really are very supportive.
Right. I mean, the film has a large scope, and they wrote some really big action cues for this film. Do you think it was more difficult to write big themes, or was it a bigger factor or challenge to really synchronize the music to picture?
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I find without having a theme, you really can't. I can't write. There are people out there who really can, and they're fantastic, but I can't write big action sequences without having a melody to use. Not least because I can't write battles without having some emotion in them. I just can't. I mean, I could physically, but I just don't understand the point. I need to have some investment emotionally in what is going on. So you'll find, in Aquaman, for instance, there's a bit in one of the biggest battles, or towards the end, there's a big battle. There's a moment where it could go just crazy in an action way, but I and James decided that we would back off and we would just play a sweeping and glorious melody, and it worked terribly well. And also, it because we had been pummeling each other I had been pummeling the crowd forever. It just felt a release, and to get the emotion of what was going on really helped. And I know in Wonder Woman as well, we had the No Man's Land sequence where they had me writing lots of big action music for that as she comes out of the trench and runs across No Man's Land. But towards the end, Patty and I we sat down and said, no, this is just not working. We need to play the emotion, and that's what it did. And then suddenly it clicked, because that scene was always going to be great. I mean, Patty had directed it beautifully. It was wonderful, but you put the wrong music against it, and I give it a 7 out of 10. As soon as I got it right emotionally, it was the whole thing came alive. And so I'm so glad that that's where we went, because there were other versions that weren't so emotional.
The film and the album also contains some pop songs, for instance, the Everything I Need, which is a lovely song, which you also produced. And of course, using songs in films, of course, is very common, today as it was in the past. Yet do you think it is almost obligatory for a film like Aquaman, DC, big spectacle? Do you think a song needs to be in a picture like this?
No, I don't. But I know that, it was James. James is the driving force behind Aquaman, and he just really, he knew that there was this love story, and he wanted to treat it in that way. And he's the boss. He was the driving force, and this is what he wanted, and we did our best for him, and it worked terribly well. But I wouldn't say that it's essential to have that. It's nice to have the odd. It's nice to have the odd song dropped into a movie at least just for a breath, you know. I mean, I think that people can, you know, in the old days, you might have got up and gone and got an ice cream or something in the cinema, you know, when the monster came. But you know, these days there's just so much going on in a movie, you don't do that. I love to see people's shoulders relax when there's a montage sequence or when a song kicks in. And sometimes it can be used the other way. It can be to quicken the pace or something. But as for our way of doing it, which was to have an end title song, which I incorporated in the score, you know, a la Titanic, if you like. It was a choice by the director, and I thought a very good one, and we went and tried to make that work for him, you know.
A sequel seems to be in development already. Can you already tell me or comment whether you will be involved in that one as well, or is it too soon?
It's too soon. Too soon. I have not had any conversations with anyone about that. It's I think you know, just the last couple of weeks, it's become clear that how enormous Aquaman's going to be. But you know, even a month ago, we wouldn't have been talking in terms of it having done so well. It's been such a great. You know, the crowds have been, people have obviously been going back to see it 2 or 3 times, and that's the sign of a success, isn't it? So.
Absolutely. Rupert, what's next for you? Can you disclose what you're currently working on?
I'm working with George Clooney on Catch-22, which is very exciting. And I'm just finishing, as ever, a lovely film with Adam Sandler, my friend. And I've got an animation that I'll be recording in the summer, and I've got a very exciting something that I can't tell you about quite yet, but call me in a couple of weeks and hopefully I'll tell you later on in the year. So I'm very lucky this year. I'm going to have, you know, hopefully a big emotional film later on in the year with animation and this sort of dark comedy with George Clooney. So things are quite varied at the moment.
Sounds great to me. You keep busy.
Yeah. It's been good.
Right, Rupert. Is there anything else you would like to add about Aquaman?
No, not at all. I mean, I did genuinely enjoy wheeling the synths out, and it would be a great joy if we did go again, because then I could get them out again. Because you know, you don't get that opportunity very often, do you? So you know, and to work with James Wan, he's just such a decent and bright, sharp storyteller. I you know, working with him again would be great. So that really.
Rupert, thank you so much for chatting with me today. It was a privilege and a joy. And I hope we get to talk soon in the future.